So in this video, we're going to be talking about eliminating guilt, which is the first step to stop yelling for good. And it totally makes sense that we think that if we dealt with the yelling and we got rid of the yelling, then the guilt will disappear. And it makes sense, right? Get rid of the yelling, no guilt, because you're guilty about the yelling. But what ends up happening when we feel guilty, we don't access the wisdom of what's happening when we're yelling so that we can actually stop it. Guilt prevents us from doing that. Guilt is one of those emotions where we kind of stay in it a little bit. We're stuck. And there's several reasons why that we kind of want to be stuck in guilt. But because anger is fast, it's almost like the opposite. It happens fast and we can't catch it in real time. And we need to make sense of it after the fact. It's very much important to help us understand why we yell when things are happening so fast in hindsight. And then once we can understand and gain the wisdom in hindsight, then we can see it in real time. But right now, if you're stuck in guilt, you're not able to do that. Guilt is having you focus on all of the things that went wrong and not learning and understanding the patterns that lead to yelling. So I'm going to talk about this in two parts. The first part is if you're feeling guilty, the most important thing is to allow the guilt instead of resisting it. And you're already in guilt, so there's no, trying to talk yourself out of it. For example, like saying, well, I'm not supposed to feel guilty so I can access the anger. No, because you're already in that emotion. And when you are already in an emotion, it means it has already taken root inside your body. So it's already there. And so you're going to have to deal with that to let the guilt pass. And the way to do that is this is where actually breathing comes into play. It's not actually stopping in the middle of anger to breathe. It's right now when you're feeling guilty is to take a breath and see what's happening in your body and check in with your body. So you can do it, even while you're listening to this video, is just take one deep breath and see where it lands in your body. Guilty. See where you feel any tension, any tingling sensations, any pinching, anything that you can feel in your body, and notice that and describe it and check in with your body. And when I say check in with your body, that means don't go to your head, which is what I do all the time. I'm always in my head. But this is a part where allowing for emotions is totally something you do in your body. And the way to do that is to take a breath and describe what's happening in your body. So for me, guilt and shame, when I feel it in my stomach. So if I take a deep breath, I can always feel it. It's almost nauseating. And then when I take another deep breath, I get some movement in it and it almost feels like it's going to choke me. And the way that I know I'm going into my head is when I start talking about it, when I start thinking about it, when I start minimalizing my guilt. I shouldn't be feeling this way. When you start having that you automatically know that you need to go back into your body and describe it. Because as soon as you can describe what's happening in your body, you'll get out of your head. You'll be like, okay, I feel my stomach in knots. Like, just use those words. Describe it as much as you can. Like, it feels like it's in knots. And then take another deep breath. What does the knot feel like? How big is it? Is it all the way across your stomach? Is it in your back? How big is it? Does it feel like it moves? Each breath, kind of just keep describing what you feel until you can kind of feel it move somewhere in your body. And that is how you're going to process that guilt. So if you find yourself habitually in guilt, every time after you yell, you're in guilt for a certain amount of time. When you're not in guilt, and let's say you've processed in your body and you're kind of in a calm space, I want you to think about guilt. And watch this video if you're not in a calm space now, but really watch it and think about guilt from a different angle. So guilt is, we believe we did something wrong. We believe we wronged our child by yelling at them. And we habitually go into guilt because there is some underlying belief that punishment will improve our behaviors. So telling ourselves we did something wrong, kind of punishing ourselves by beating ourselves up, judging ourselves, all of those things that we do from guilt, we believe that this will correct our behavior. And we stick to this belief because we have evidence of it. Because whenever we yell and we're angry and then we go into guilt, we probably don't yell after that. We're so focused on how awful we are and what we did was awful. We don't want to ruin our child that we then don't yell. So it almost gives us this instant gratification that yes, guilt is an emotion that is necessary in our lives. It's necessary for me to stop the yelling. And what I want, the perspective I want you to look at it from is that guilt will actually prevent you from improving your behaviors. It'll do the exact opposite. And I'm not going to go into studies about that. And in fact, somebody very famous has done so many studies. And in fact, that's Brene Brown on shame. So shame is I am bad, and guilt is I did something bad. And I've read all of her books, and I can tell you the basic kind of underlying thing is that shame or guilt will not improve your behavior. So that's all of her studies that show that. But you can also see that right now. Guilt prevents you from yelling in the short term, but does it really get at the reason why you're yelling at the long term? If you notice yelling being your kind of default setting for when you're frustrated, when you're angry, when you're stressed or tired, when you find it being that default, you know that guilt is not serving you to getting to that place where your go-to reaction to things happening with your kids is yelling. So this kind of firm belief that feeling guilty will help us improve is tied to a belief that yelling is bad. And yelling is bad is not a fact. And I know that there's a bunch of studies that say yelling at your kids is bad and has detrimental effects and all of that. What I want to offer you is that other people think yelling is good. And in fact, I know somebody that thinks yelling is good and necessary, and that is my mother. My mother, from childhood up until today, yells at me. I'm an adult, she's an adult, and she yells at me. She believes it's good. I asked her when I was a teenager, why do you always yell at me? I mean, literally, her go-to was yelling everything at me, not even when I did something wrong. And her reasoning was that it helped me improve. So she thought yelling is good. And then now we think that yelling is bad. And I used to think, well, yelling is bad. My mom did it, and all of these things. And what I want to say is that yelling is neither good or bad. And the reason why I want to offer you that is because there's no facts. There can be studies that show either is true, that yelling is good, and there can be studies because studies will only show you a certainty at a certain level. It cannot guarantee that that's a fact. It can only show some link, some correlation based on a degree of certainty, and that's it. So it's not even fact. It's somebody's interpretation of some results that they obtain, of data points that they obtain. And so what I want you to do is not to then go from yelling is bad to yelling is good, like my mom thinks that in order for you to lessen the guilt so you can access some of the patterns of why you are yelling, is that I want you to loosen up a little bit of that yelling is bad. And I want you to think of, and I'm going to give you some ideas. And one of the things is that yelling is sometimes okay. So I was on a trip with my family, and we were in London, and they drive on the left side of the road. And where I live, they drive on the right side of the road. And so as a pedestrian, when you go to cross the street, you do not look left, you look right to see the cars. And it's such a habitual thing, right? If you have grown up with driving on one side of the road, you look to that side, the other side. And I was walking behind my husband, and I was with my daughter, and then they were standing at the light, and they were about to cross, and I was behind, but I saw that a car was coming from the right side of the road, and my husband looked left, and I screamed, watch out. I yelled, watch out. This is London, a huge city, traffic noises, everything, and I yelled so that they could hear me, so that I made sure that they stopped. And so sometimes yelling is okay. And if you can think that sometimes yelling is okay, see if that feels believable to you. And if it doesn't feel believable to you because you're still thinking, well, yelling is bad at your kids, sometimes, I actually yelled at my kid to watch out. I sometimes yell at my kid, hey, watch out, and I am yelling at them at that moment. If that does not feel believable to you, what I want you to do is move maybe what yelling is into a more neutral space. Instead of it being good, bad, I don't want you to go all the way to the good. But instead of kind of coming from this absolute that it's bad, what I want you to do is just shift it a little bit more in between the good and the bad, into a more neutral space. And so, what is yelling? Yelling is speaking above a certain conversational decimal. I think it's like 60 decimals. So yelling is speaking. Yelling is saying words above 60 decibels. And because a lot of times we think guilt, I'm ruining my child. But when you're saying a ruining, what is the ruining? I'm yelling at my child. I'm doing that. That's the action of what you think is ruining your child. I'm yelling. And so if you can try to think of, I've spoken to my child at above 60 decimals. Does that sound believable to you? Try to find some neutrality in that yelling, because right now you're thinking yelling is bad, yelling ruins kids, has detrimental effects. And that is what your brain, because of a belief system, because of your experiences up until now, you don't need to go back into the past or anything like that. It's like right now, you are really clinging to a belief that yelling is so bad, and that because you did something bad, that is causing your guilt. And I just want to offer you some of that loosening up. So I want to recap that. 2 techniques: allow and process the guilt. Breathe through it. Don't go to your head. Check in with your body. Describe what's happening in your body. Move from yelling is bad to try to a more believable, it's still believable to you, but less bad, more neutral stance on yelling. Yelling is speaking above a certain decimal. Yelling is sometimes okay. Yelling is sometimes accessible. Sometimes it's not ruining a kid's life. Sometimes it's saving a kid's life. Try to find some neutrality in that yelling instead of going to some of those absolutes. So what I want you to do is go back to that PDF, work through that guilt, and then go back to tracking it. And what I want to offer you is that I have a free 45-minute consultation where I will coach you. I will coach you on your guilt to help open that up for you. And I'll talk about the process and how you can actually stop yelling for good and end that frustration that's causing the yelling. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll check back with you in the next.